Morning, everyone. Private Underwood, Company A, 9th Pennsylvania Reserves. Today, I'd like to take a look at some of the uniforms and equipment worn by the Union soldier during the American Civil War. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's make history come alive. The first thing we're going to take a look at today is the shelter. Now, it might not look like much, but for the soldier on the march, this was home sweet home. It's actually made of two shelter halves buttoned together. Each soldier would be issued one shelter half, and in order to construct the entire shelter, he'd partner up, they would button the halves together, put the stakes in, and there's your place to sleep for the night. The canvas, thankfully, is decently water resistant, so he had a way to keep his gear nice and dry should the rains come. Unfortunately, I do not have a partner to crawl into the tent with, so it's just me by my lonesome. Here is where I would sleep, and you can see I'm actually using my knapsack as a makeshift pillow. Not the most comfortable, not the most glamorous, but for a soldier on the march, it'll do. Moving inside now, let's have a look at some of the equipment that a soldier on campaign would have carried. Now, a soldier out on campaign had to live off of his back, which meant that if he needed it, he had to carry it. It could get heavy, but everything you see here is essential for comfort and combat effectiveness on campaign. Starting out, we have the gum blanket. I consider this to be one of the most essential things that a soldier could carry. Not only is it a ground cloth, it is a rain fly and a raincoat. A 3-in-1 deal that a soldier would carry in his pack. Speaking of blankets, we have the federal issue wool blanket. This is what a soldier would wrap himself up in to sleep for the night. Moving over here, we come to the leathers. This is the soldier's belt. This belt, worn around the waist, carried his cap pouch, which held inside it percussion caps. These caps were used to prime the musket, and without these, he couldn't fight. It also held, of course, his bayonet, the soldier's cold steel. Moving over here, we have the cartridge box. This is where a soldier would carry his ammunition for his rifled musket. If we open up the cartridge box, we can see that held within are cartridges. These cartridges hold the gunpowder and the ball that a soldier would use to load and fire his rifled musket. And here is what one of them looks like up close. The ball, of course, is down here, the powder charge in here, and here is where the soldier would tear the cartridge with his teeth, dump the powder down the barrel, start the ball, use his ramrod to ram it all home, and then he was ready to fire once he got the cap on. Now this cartridge box has in it 2 tins to hold the cartridges. These are actually multi-level tins. Hidden within the cartridge box, there are actually little more spaces on the bottom to hold extra ammunition. After the soldier had expended all the rounds up here, the order would come to change tins at a lull in the battle. He would pull out his tin and move the rounds from the bottom up to the top, and then he would be ready to fire again. Coming over here, we have another essential piece of kit. On the march, especially under the hot southern sun, heat stroke and dehydration were very real issues that the soldier faced. So this canteen was imperative. The soldier would fill this with water, and as a bonus, to keep the water cool, he would often soak this wool cover in order to maintain the cool temperature of his water. Coming over here, we have the tarred canvas haversack and the tin cup. Within this haversack was held the rations. A soldier's rations consisted of a few things when he was out on campaign. His salt pork, a form of protein that was very well preserved. Often he would have coffee. Sometimes he would be issued beans and sugar, and whatever else he could scrounge up. Opening the haversack up, let's have a look at what's inside. First thing we have here is a poke sack. This particular one is filled with a coffee ration. There was one thing a soldier on the march loved, it was coffee. Nothing like a good cup of coffee in the morning to get up, go, and fight those rebs. We also have the soldier's bread, the oft encountered but oft hated hardtack cracker. Made of little more than baked flour and a bit of salt, it would keep for weeks or even months on end. This is probably one of the worst things that a soldier could eat, but food is food at the end of the day. Oh, that is awful. Ugh. Ugh. Now, of course, a soldier couldn't just live on bread alone. He would also be issued a protein. Usually that was salt pork. Pork soaked in a brine of salt and water so that it would keep on the march. He would have it in a sack much like this, and believe me, in the heat of the southern sun, it would begin to smell. Now, of course, soldier has to have something to eat with, and that's where his silverware comes in. The fork usually had 3 tines, as did most forks of the era. He would, of course, have a knife, and often he would have a spoon, but unfortunately for me, during a battle, my spoon fell out and is now somewhere between here and Virginia. So there's that. Soldier also would carry, often strapped to the outside of his haversack, his tin cup. This cup was another soldier's multi-tool. This wasn't just his cup for drinking water. He could use it to collect water to put into his canteen, to boil that same water, to boil soup, to boil coffee, to collect things. It was truly a very well-rounded tool. And as long as there was a liquid in it, he could put this tin cup into the fire. Or, often soldiers would put a bale of wire over top the cup so that they could hang it over the fire to avoid direct contact with the flames. Next thing to have a look at is the soldier's knapsack. Now, this knapsack was worn much like the modern backpack we all know and love, but it had a few extra features to make it ideal for a soldier on campaign. Up top, we have the blanket or the coat straps. Depending on whether the soldier carried his blanket within the bag or on the outside, he could roll up either his blanket or greatcoat and use these straps to keep it secured up on top of his knapsack. Opening it up, we see that it has 2 separate compartments. Here is where he would keep his shelter half and his blanket if he didn't choose to roll it up on top of his knapsack. These would buckle in, keeping everything nice and secure. Between the 2 bags, he would often put his gum blanket. Out of way, but easy to reach in case the rain started. Now you'll see I here have a cast iron skillet. That's because I like to have something I can use to cook my salt pork rations on the move. Once you've stopped marching for the day and you set up a camp, oftentimes that's your only time to cook. So having something to cook with is always a nice bonus. Now, not every soldier would carry these. Weight was often a consideration, and oftentimes one soldier would have one of these, and he'd pass it around to everyone in the company, and they'd share it. I just happen to be that person. It also happens to be a very handy weapon in case you're out of ammo and the Rebs are storming your camp. Coming over here, we have the other part of the knapsack, the other bag. Held together by 2 leather ties, this is where a lot of these soldiers' personal items would have been stored. Let's open it up and have a look. So the first thing we have here, extra ammunition. The soldier carried more ammunition than just what he had in his cartridge box. This particular one, this blue one, is what's known as a cleaning cartridge, and held a special ball within that, when shot out of the rifled musket, would actually help to clear some of the fouling from within the barrel. Speaking of the rifled musket, keeping it clean was paramount. A dirty musket cannot fire, and a soldier who cannot shoot is not effective. So here we have patches. These would be put on a worm on the end of the ramrod, run down the barrel to clean it out. Sometimes, of course, camp life could get a little boring. Anybody who's been in the military knows that it's a lot more waiting than fighting. So to pass the time, a soldier would often carry something simple, like a deck of cards. And yes, gambling was a thing that happened in the army. Finally, and I would consider perhaps the most important, we have an extra pair of socks. Keep in mind, this is the era where most of a soldier's movement is done on foot. The average soldier does not ride a horse. That's for the officers and the cavalry. And he's not hopping into the wagons because a wagon could only carry a few people, and those were reserved for equipment. Taking care of his feet ensured that a soldier could march for miles upon miles, and when it came time to fight, he could fight just as well as anyone. Especially if it rained, having an extra pair of socks made your life a lot better and helped you avoid things like gangrene. And of course, where would a soldier be without his best friend? His rifled musket, the weapon of a soldier in the Civil War. Now, by the 1860s, firearms technology had progressed immensely. Not only do we have the very reliable percussion cap firing mechanism, but we also have, within the barrel of our weapon, rifling. Grooves that, when gripped by the ball, allow that ball to spin. That gives the ball greater speed, greater accuracy, and a greater chance of sending old Johnny Reb all the way back to Virginia. This particular rifled musket is the 1861 .58 caliber Springfield rifled musket, the rifle that would become synonymous with the Union soldier during the American Civil War. Of course, this was by no means the only firearm that you would see in service with the Union. Many soldiers also carried the Enfield rifle. In the cavalry, you would have various carbines and breech loaders. Even some of the infantry would carry the famous Sharps rifle. In fact, Company A, 9th PA Reserves, early on in their service, would famously carry that Sharps rifle into battle. And there were, of course, others, far too numerous to mention here, but by and large, when you think Civil War, Union soldier, you think the 1861 Springfield rifled musket. Let's take a minute now to talk about a soldier's uniform. What I'm wearing right now is, by and large, what you would see a soldier in the Union Army wearing right about the middle, all the way up through the end of the war. We'll start inside and we'll work our way out. The first thing we got to talk about is your underwear as a soldier. That's right, soldiers in the Civil War had a very, very complex set of underwear. It came in three pieces: your shirt, your drawers, and your socks. Roll up my pant leg so we can have a look here. All the Victorian folks are losing their minds right about now. But here you can see are my flannel drawers, my long johns. And yes, even in the heat of the Virginia sun, a Union soldier would be expected to wear his drawers. Over the drawers, on his feet, he would have his socks. These are wool socks. They come up to right about mid-calf height. Some soldiers would have them up to the knee. These will keep your feet comfortable, dry, and warm. Rolling up the sleeve on my fatigue blouse, you can see that we have the shirt. Now, the shirt that I'm wearing today is a linen one, which isn't necessarily the most historically accurate, but unfortunately my other one currently stinks to high heaven after a wonderful weekend at the 160th Wilderness, so this is what I'm wearing today. The shirt that I would normally wear, though, is made of wool, and that would have been the standard issue shirt that most federal soldiers would have worn. That's right, no cotton undershirts here. Cotton was down south, and the South was in rebellion. So the Union soldier would wear, under his coat, a wool shirt. Moving now to the outer layers, we come to the trousers. These are made of sky blue wool, and these were the standard issue trousers issued to federal soldiers. These are very basic, very simple, and yes, 100% wool. I'll unbutton my coat a little, and you'll see that these are held up by a pair of suspenders. That's right, no belt loops. In the 1860s, belt loops on pants just weren't a thing, really. So soldier and civilian alike would hold up his trousers with a trusty pair of suspenders. Moving up top to my coat, I'm wearing the Federal Fatigue Blouse, otherwise known as the sack coat. Now, this is by no means the only coat that soldiers in the Union military would have worn. There were a variety of coats that you could see on a soldier, especially early on in the war, when state arsenals were still clearing out their warehouses. Some states had their own specific jackets. Most notably, New York had a very distinct style of jacket. Other soldiers would wear the tailored, dressy frock coat as their choice for combat. Some soldiers very early on would move to the sack coat, and still others, such as the Zouave units, would have some very distinctive, brightly trimmed, very flashy uniforms. But the sack coat by and large became synonymous with the Union fighting man, for a couple of reasons. The frock coat, the dress coat, which was sometimes worn in combat, was found to be lacking in its utility. Despite providing a very squared away, soldierly appearance, it restricted the movement of the soldier's body, and it was a bit more weight than he felt comfortable carrying. So very early on, some units switched to the sack coat as their go-to combat garment. And it was perfectly for it. This was originally your work blouse, your fatigue blouse that you would wear out on fatigue working duty. A loose cut, room to breathe, room to move, no restriction of movement. It's no surprise that this very quickly became a favored garment for combat. Up top, we have not the kepi, the forage cap. Now I'll take it off here. That's right, this is a forage cap. The kepis were usually for your officers, or if you were one of the soldiers in the army lucky enough to have a good bit of money, you might private purchase a kepi. But by and large, soldiers in the Union Army would wear the forage cap. Now, the forage cap is actually a descendant of the military shako, a high-crowned military cap that some units would actually continue to wear throughout the war. However, for our unit, there is no stiffener in this forage cap. It doesn't have the squared away appearance of the kepi or the shako, but it's a very simple, practical design that would have proudly sat atop the heads of many a soldier marching his way through Georgia. The brim here is also unbound. On your kepis and your more expensive privately purchased forage caps, you would often see binding around the brim. That would keep it from cracking and from tearing as it was exposed to the elements. But for the average soldier, no binding on the brim. Up top, you'll see that it has markings on it. This is my hat brass. Now, whether or not a soldier had brass on his hat was often up to his commanding officer or up to his personal preferences. For the infantry, the go-to was the hunting horn. If you see a forage cap with crossed rifles or a kepi with crossed rifles, those didn't come out until after the Civil War. So during the Civil War, the go-to infantry marker was the horn. Up here we have the 9 for 9th Pennsylvania. Some folks would have their company letter often in the center of the horn. For us, that would be A for Company A. And still others would have nothing at all, just a plain federal forage cap. One little extra thing that I have tucked up in my cap is a little hard to see, so I'll come closer to the camera here. The pick. Might not look like much, but this is an essential piece of kit. As you fire your rifled musket, powder fouling builds up, especially in your cone. And if too much builds up, the spark won't get through to ignite your powder charge. So a soldier would use this to wiggle it in there, clean out the fouling, and be once again ready to fire his rifled musket. For ease of access, I keep this actually tucked right up top in my forage cap. I keep it right where my hand would go, so that if my weapon misfires in combat and I need to get to it quickly, all I need to do, reach up, grab it, do what I need to do, and return it to where it sat. On my feet, we have the brogans. Rough out, leather shoes, dyed black. They are definitely not the most comfortable thing in the world, and unfortunately for many Union soldiers, they were not the most durable thing in the world. Oftentimes, after many, many miles of marching, sometimes these would simply disintegrate. But these are important. Again, we are marching day in and day out. We're not riding horses, we're not riding wagons unless we're injured, or we're riding with the supplies. So these are essential to keep nice, to keep clean, and to keep in good condition, to make sure that we can march into combat and fight effectively. So that's roughly the uniform of the Union soldier. A very basic, general description, but what you would most likely see roughly about the mid to late war if you came across a Union infantry. All right, so we've shown you the gear, we've shown you what's in it. Now, let's get ready for battle. The Rebs are coming, we've got to fight them off, so let's gear up. Now, how the gear was put on was determined by a couple of things. There were, of course, regulations for best practice on how to wear it, and then there was a soldier's personal preference. So what I'm going to show you is how I put my gear on so that I have ease of access to everything I need while in the fight or on the march. First thing I put on is my haversack, full of my rations, my silverware, and my tin cup. Over top of that, I put my cartridge box, make sure that the cartridge box sits right here on my hip. A very natural position for my hand to go to get my ammunition for when I need to fire my weapon. Now, to make sure none of this goes flopping around, up next, I put on my belt. Of course, remember the belt contains my bayonet and a cap pouch. It goes right here, around the waist, hooks in like so, and I bring my cap pouch here to the front. Once again, ease of access, and my bayonet hangs down at the side so that when the time comes to draw it, it's right where I need it to be. Over top of all this will go my canteen. Now, I don't want my canteen held down by my belt, because during battle or on the march, if I need to hydrate, I want to be able to access it. So it hangs here, right about at the small of my back. Ease of access for drinking my water, but held in tight enough that it doesn't jiggle around and cause discomfort while I'm on the march. Of course, last thing I grab for battle is my rifled musket. Ready to go, ready to fight old Johnny Reb, ready to preserve the Union. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't I put on the knapsack? There's a very specific reason for that, and that is that most soldiers did not wear their knapsack into battle if they could help it. In fact, there are many records of Union soldiers before battle discarding their knapsack by the roadside, either to pick it up later or to never see it again. So going into battle, very rarely do I wear the knapsack unless I know that I'm going to need something in it in the heat of battle. So there you have it. The Union soldier geared up, ready to fight. So now that we're all geared up for combat, let's discuss how a soldier in the Union Army would fight on the field of battle. Of course, his principal weapon here was his rifled musket. And to understand how he used that rifled musket, we need to discuss drill. Drill was a constant part of a soldier's life in the Union Army. He would drill and drill and drill again until his movements with this rifled musket were habit. He could move through them without even thinking. For combat, the most important drill he would learn is something called loading in 9 times. A set of 9 counts that would ensure that he could load his rifled musket in an efficient and organized manner, even in the heat of the most intense combat. So let's take a look at loading in 9 times. The soldier would start from the position of shoulder arms. From here, he would get the command to load. He brings the rifle between his feet. His hand goes to his cartridge box. He would take the cartridge from the box, put it to his teeth. He tears the cartridge, spits the paper, puts it to the edge of his muzzle. He charges the cartridge, putting the powder down the barrel and starting the ball. He draws his ramrod, putting it in the barrel. He rams the ball home. Removing the rammer, he brings it back. And here's the important part. He returns the ramrod with his pinky. The idea is to keep his other fingers away from the muzzle of his rifle should any of that powder charge go off and send a stray musket ball flying up into the air. By sending the rammer home with the pinky, he ensures that his other fingers stay nice and safe. The next command he gets is to prime. He brings the rifle up right on top of his cap pouch. He half-cocks the hammer. Reaches into his cap pouch, takes a cap, puts it on the cone. From here, he returns to shouldered arms. His musket is now loaded and ready to fire. He gets the command, ready. Full cocks. Aim! He aims his rifle, and fire! Bang! He fires the rifle. Recover, arms! He brings it back to the ready position, and depending on the orders, he can either go back to shoulder arms, he can load again, or whatever his commanding officer wishes him to do. But let's say things are getting hairy. Let's say that bullets, or minute balls rather, just aren't enough. The soldier would get the order, fix bayonet. Rifle comes to the center, grabs it, takes the bayonet with the left hand, straight up and around, puts it over, slides it down, locks it in place. Back to shouldered arms. Now, the soldier is ready to give him the cold steel. With this bayonet affixed, his firearm has become a very effective polearm, and he's ready to send the Rebs packing. So, now that the battle's been won, it's time to hit the road again. And that means it's time to gear up to march. Now, like I said earlier, as a soldier on campaign, you need to live off your back. Everything you're taking with you, you carry. So as you can see, the tent is gone. That's because it is rolled up, folded up, and tucked away inside the knapsack. You'll also notice that up on the top of the knapsack, I've rolled my blanket and my tent poles. All of my other goods tucked up away in the inner bag, and we are almost ready to go. But since it does look like rain, let's take an extra step and protect ourselves from the weather. And we do that, of course, with the gum blanket. And this looked a lot more elegant in my head. We wrap it around ourselves, and now we are ready to march along down the road, whatever Mother Nature throws at us. Protected from the wind and rain, everything we need, packed up in our packs, and we're ready to go marching on to Richmond. Well, there you have it. The uniforms, weapon, and equipment of a Union soldier during the American Civil War. Hope you enjoyed today's video, and I hope you learned something from it. If any of this interested you at all, then I encourage you to further your own research. Check out your local library, check out your local bookstore, ask your history teachers, and even better yet, go out and see a reenactment, or join a reenactment unit yourself. There's all kinds of fun ways to learn more about history and to see it come to life. Until next time, Devin Underwood, Company A, 9th Pennsylvania Reserves.